Hey there! Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. $50,000. The check lay on my kitchen table, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the worn laminate surface beneath it. I stared at the signature, Bradley Thornton, written with the confident flourish of a man accustomed to buying whatever he wanted, including, apparently, my absence from my only daughter's wedding. I traced my fingers over the check, remembering the cold look in his eyes when he'd handed it to me yesterday. "I'm sorry, Dr. Winters, but I have to be honest. You don't exactly fit the aesthetic we're going for." His voice had been smooth, practiced, like he was declining a business proposal rather than telling a mother she couldn't attend her daughter's wedding. I'd spent 35 years of my life as a neurosurgeon, my hands steady as they navigated the delicate pathways of the human brain. I'd held lives in those hands, made decisions that determined whether someone would wake up able to speak or walk or remember their children's names. Yet somehow, in the eyes of Bradley Thornton, I was nothing more than an aesthetic problem to be solved, preferably by disappearing. The first time I met Bradley was 6 months ago, when Claire brought him to dinner at my modest apartment. I was temporarily living there while my house underwent renovations, a fact that seemed to perplex Bradley from the moment he stepped through the door. His eyes had scanned the small space, with barely concealed judgment, taking in the second-hand furniture and the simple decor. Claire had warned me he came from money, but it wasn't until I saw his reaction to my home that I understood just how much that defined him. "Mom, this is Bradley," Claire had said, her eyes bright with an excitement I hadn't seen in years. She'd always been so focused on her career in architecture, so independent. Seeing her lean into this man's embrace stirred a complicated mix of emotions in me. Happiness that she'd found someone, concern about the slight stiffness in her smile. "It's lovely to meet you, Bradley," I'd said, extending my hand. "Claire has told me so much about you." He'd taken my hand with a firm grip, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Likewise, Mrs. Winters. Claire speaks of you often." "It's Dr. Winters, actually," Claire had corrected gently, and I'd waved my hand dismissively. "Mom was a neurosurgeon," Claire had explained proudly. "One of the best in the country." Bradley's eyebrows had risen slightly. "Was? I'm semi-retired now," I'd explained. "I mostly handle administrative work at the hospital these days." I didn't mention that after 3.5 decades of surgery, my hands had started to develop the faintest tremor, imperceptible to most, but enough that I'd recognized it was time to step back from the operating room. It had been a difficult decision, but one I'd made with the same careful consideration I'd given every surgical plan throughout my career. "Administrative work," Bradley had repeated, his tone suggesting he was mentally downgrading my importance. "And that pays well enough for you to put Claire through private school and college?" Claire had tensed beside him. "Bradley, I told you Mom made sacrifices." "It's all right, dear," I'd interrupted, setting the homemade casserole on the table. "I was fortunate in my career, Bradley, and careful with my savings." I didn't feel the need to explain to this stranger that I'd been at the top of my field, that I'd pioneered surgical techniques that were now standard practice, that the administrative work I did involved overseeing the hospital's entire neurosurgery department. Dinner had proceeded with a strained politeness. Bradley spoke at length about his tech company, about the luxury condos he was developing downtown, about the vacation he'd recently taken to the Maldives. He asked few questions about me or my life, and when Claire tried to steer the conversation toward my accomplishments, I gently redirected it. I'd never been one to boast about my work. The lives I'd saved were reward enough. When they were leaving, Claire had hugged me tightly. "He's usually not so intense," she'd whispered. "He's just nervous about meeting you." I'd smiled and kissed her cheek. "It's fine, sweetheart. I'm just happy to see you happy." But as the weeks passed and wedding plans began, it became increasingly clear that Bradley viewed me as an inconvenience at best, an embarrassment at worst. He excluded me from decisions about the ceremony and reception, dismissed my offers to help, and once, when Claire wasn't in the room, suggested that perhaps I'd be more comfortable not attending certain pre-wedding events with his high-profile business associates. The breaking point came at Claire's birthday dinner, a lavish affair at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. I hadn't received an invitation, an oversight, according to Claire, when I'd called to wish her happy birthday and learned of the gathering. I'd shown up anyway, dressed in my best outfit, a simple green dress with the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. The hostess had tried to turn me away. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the Thornton party is a private event. I'm the mother of the birthday girl," I'd replied firmly. "Claire Winters?" After a moment of confusion and a whispered consultation with another staff member, I was reluctantly led to a private dining room where about 20 people sat around a long table. Claire's face had lit up when she saw me, but Bradley's had darkened like a storm cloud. "Mom!" Claire had exclaimed, rising to embrace me. "I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart," I'd said, holding her tight. "Happy birthday." Bradley had approached, his smile tight. "Dr. Winters, what a surprise. I hope you don't mind," I'd said pleasantly. "I couldn't let my daughter's birthday pass without seeing her." He gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table, as far from him and Claire as possible. "Of course not. Please, join us." Throughout the dinner, I'd watched as Bradley charmed the table, his arm possessively around Claire's shoulders. He'd introduced everyone, his parents, his college friends, his business partners, but had conveniently forgotten to introduce me to anyone. When the dessert arrived, an elaborate cake with Claire's name written in gold, Bradley had stood to make a toast. "To my beautiful fiancé," he'd said, raising his glass. "Thank you for making my life complete." Then, as an afterthought, he'd nodded in my direction. "And thank you to Claire's mother for joining us tonight." The slight was subtle, but unmistakable. I was an outsider, an afterthought, not worth mentioning by name or relationship to him. After the dinner, Claire had walked me out, apologizing profusely. "He's just been so stressed with work and the wedding plans," she'd explained. "He doesn't mean to be rude." I'd squeezed her hand. "It's all right, sweetheart. I understand." And I did understand, not that Bradley was stressed, but that he was showing Claire exactly who he was. I just wasn't sure she was seeing it clearly. The wedding plans continued, with me firmly on the periphery. Then, 1 week before the ceremony, Bradley had called me. "Dr. Winters," he'd said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I was hoping we could meet to discuss something. Privately." We'd arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital where I worked. Bradley had arrived in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. He'd ordered a complex coffee drink for himself, nothing for me. "I'll get right to the point," he'd said, after sitting down across from me. "I've been thinking about the wedding, and I have a proposition for you." I'd felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of proposition? He'd reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. $50,000, he'd said, sliding it across the table. "In exchange for your absence at the wedding." I'd stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "Look," he'd continued, leaning forward, "I know this sounds harsh, but I need you to understand. This wedding is a networking opportunity for me. The governor will be there, the CEO of Westridge Pharmaceuticals, people who could take my business to the next level. And I would be—" "What, an embarrassment?" I'd asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. He'd had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but pressed on. "I'm sorry, but I have to be honest. You don't exactly project the image we're going for. Claire says you refuse to update your wardrobe. You won't let her pay for you to get your hair properly styled. And frankly," he'd gestured vaguely at me, "your whole appearance is just not what we want in the wedding photos." I'd sat there, stunned into silence, as he continued. "We can tell everyone you had a medical emergency. No one needs to know about our arrangement. Claire will be disappointed, of course, but she'll get over it. He'd pushed the envelope closer to me. $50,000 is a lot of money, Dr. Winters. Think of what you could do with it. Update that apartment. Take a nice vacation. Buy yourself some decent clothes. I'd looked down at the envelope, then back at Bradley's expectant face. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not just the handsome, successful exterior, but the hollow core beneath. This was the man my daughter planned to spend her life with. This was the man who might someday father my grandchildren. I need to think about it, I'd said finally, taking the envelope. Relief had washed over his face. Of course. Take your time. Well, not too much time. The wedding is next Saturday. He'd stood up, straightening his already immaculate suit. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. Claire always says you're practical. As he'd walked away, I'd opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000, along with a handwritten note, for services not rendered. Discretion appreciated. And now, a day later, that check sat on my kitchen table. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Not just the paper, but the insult it represented. My phone rang, Claire's name flashing on the screen. "Mom!" Her voice was bright, excited. "Just checking if you're still coming to the rehearsal dinner tonight." I looked at the check in my hand, at Bradley's arrogant signature. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my decision crystallizing in that moment. I wouldn't miss it for the world. What Bradley didn't know was that I hadn't survived 35 years in a male-dominated surgical field without learning how to handle men like him. Men who underestimated me. Men who thought they could buy me off or push me aside. What Bradley didn't know was that I had already contacted Dr. Walter Jenkins, the hospital director and my longtime colleague, about Bradley's business proposition. Walter had been appalled, his loyalty to me forged through decades of working side by side in the operating room. "Catherine, this is outrageous," he'd said when I'd called him after my meeting with Bradley. "What are you going to do?" "Something surgical," I'd replied. "Precise, measured, and designed to remove exactly what needs to be removed." And what Bradley certainly didn't know was that I had recorded our entire conversation on my phone. A habit I'd developed years ago when dealing with difficult insurance companies who tried to deny coverage for necessary procedures. The recording captured every condescending word, every insulting implication. I put the check in my purse and went to get ready for the rehearsal dinner. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm purpose. Bradley Thornton was about to learn what happened when you underestimated Margaret Winters. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Carlyle, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. I arrived 15 minutes early, taking a moment in my car to prepare myself. I wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, and the same pearl necklace. My silver hair was styled in its usual bob, neat and practical as it had been throughout my career. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, seeing the face that had aged naturally over my 68 years, lines earned through concentration in the operating room, through nights of worry over patients, through the grief of losing my husband 7 years ago. Bradley might see an old woman who didn't fit his aesthetic, but I saw a life lived with purpose and integrity. Inside the restaurant, I was directed to a private dining room where about 30 people had gathered. Claire spotted me immediately and hurried over, radiant in a cream-colored cocktail dress. "Mom!" She embraced me warmly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, sweetheart." "So do you." I held her at arm's length, taking in her happiness, her excitement. She had always been like this, wholehearted in her emotions, transparent in her joy. It was one of the things I loved most about her. This daughter who had grown up watching me maintain professional composure through the most difficult situations. "Come meet Bradley's parents," she said, taking my hand. "They just flew in from Chicago this morning." She led me to a distinguished-looking couple standing near the bar. The man was tall and broad-shouldered with perfectly coiffed silver hair, while the woman was slender and blonde, her face showing signs of extensive cosmetic work that left her with a perpetually surprised expression. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton "This is my mother, Dr. Margaret Winters," Claire said proudly. "Please, call me Robert," Bradley's father said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his smile practiced. "And this is my wife, Victoria." "Right, how lovely to meet you," Victoria said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to social niceties. "Bradley has told us so much about you." I wondered exactly what Bradley had told them about me. That I was difficult? Embarrassing? A problem to be solved with a $50,000 check? "All good things, I hope," I replied with a smile. Victoria's eyes darted briefly to my pearl necklace, then to my simple dress. "Bradley mentioned you're in the medical field. A nurse, was it?" Beside me, Claire stiffened. "Actually, Mom is—" "I worked at Memorial Hospital for 35 years, I said smoothly. "I'm semi-retired now." "How nice," Victoria said, clearly losing interest. "Nursing is such a noble profession." "Mom was—" Claire began again, but I squeezed her arm gently. "It's fine, dear. I had long ago learned not to need validation from people like the Thorntons. My worth wasn't determined by their recognition of it." Robert checked his watch. "Bradley should be here any minute. He had an important call with investors that couldn't be rescheduled." "Of course," I said. "Business comes first." Victoria nodded approvingly, missing my subtle sarcasm. "That's what I've always said. Bradley gets that from his father." Claire excused herself to greet other guests, leaving me with the elder Thorntons. There was an awkward pause before Robert cleared his throat. "So, Dr. Winters, it is doctor, isn't it? What was your specialty?" "Neurosurgery," I replied. "I specialized in pediatric cases for the last 15 years of my practice." Victoria's carefully arranged features showed genuine surprise. "You were a brain surgeon?" "Yes," I said simply. Robert looked at me with new interest. "That's impressive. Bradley didn't mention that." "I imagine there are many things Bradley doesn't mention," I said lightly. Before they could respond, there was a stir at the entrance to the room. Bradley had arrived, immaculate in a tailored suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. He moved through the room with confidence, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, playing the role of gracious host. When he reached his parents, he embraced them warmly. "Mom, Dad, so glad you made it." Then he turned to me, his smile faltering almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Winters, good to see you." There was a question in his eyes as he looked at me. Had I made my decision? Would I take his money and disappear? "I wouldn't miss it," I said meaningfully. A flash of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it. "Well, shall we all sit down? I believe dinner is about to be served." The seating arrangement placed me far from Claire and Bradley, at a table with distant relatives and friends I'd never met. It was a deliberate slight, but not an unexpected one. Throughout the meal, I watched Bradley hold court at the main table, keeping Claire close by his side, whispering in her ear occasionally and making her laugh. She looked so happy, so in love, and for a moment I questioned my plan. Was I doing the right thing? Would exposing Bradley's true nature only hurt Claire in the end? But then I remembered his cold eyes as he'd pushed that check across the table. You don't exactly project the image we're going for. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty that I could be bought and dismissed. No, Claire deserved to know who she was really marrying. After dinner, Bradley stood to make a toast. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke glowingly of Claire and their future together, and even managed a brief, perfunctory acknowledgement of me. And to Claire's mother, "Thank you for everything you've done." Not even my name, just Claire's mother. When the dinner was winding down, Bradley approached my table, his smile tight. "Dr. Winters, could I speak with you for a moment? Privately?" I followed him to a quiet corner of the room. "Yes, Bradley? I was hoping you'd given some thought to our discussion yesterday," he said, lowering his voice. "The rehearsal is tomorrow morning, and I'd really like to have this situation resolved before then." "Situation," I repeated. "Is that what I am to you? A situation?" He sighed impatiently. "Look, I know this is difficult, but I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. That check I gave you, That's more than generous. And what exactly am I supposed to tell Claire when she asks why her mother isn't at her wedding? Bradley shrugged. Like I said, a medical emergency, a last-minute consultation. Whatever works. Claire will be disappointed, but she'll be so caught up in the day that she won't dwell on it. He leaned closer. And afterward, when things have settled down, I'll help smooth things over. I'll make sure she understands whatever we need her to understand. The casual way he planned to lie to my daughter, to manipulate her feelings, made my decision even easier. I see. He seemed to take my response as agreement. So we have a deal? I'll let you know tomorrow, I said. At the rehearsal, frustration flickered across his face. Dr. Winters, I need to know now. There are arrangements to be made, explanations to be prepared. Tomorrow, I repeated firmly. And Bradley. It's Dr. Winters, not Mrs. Winters, not Claire's mother. Dr. Winters. I left him standing there, his jaw clenched in barely suppressed anger. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about Claire as a child. Her determination, her independence, her fierce sense of justice. Once, when she was 9, she'd come home from school in tears because a boy in her class had been bullying a smaller child. "It's not right, Mom," she'd said, wiping her eyes. "Just because he's bigger doesn't mean he gets to be mean." I'd held her close. "You're right, sweetheart. And what did you do about it?" "I told him to stop. And when he wouldn't, I told the teacher." She'd looked up at me, uncertain. Was that the right thing to do? "Absolutely," I'd assured her. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak the truth, even when it's difficult." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Bradley's check in front of me. With steady hands, hands that had once separated conjoined twins, that had removed tumors other surgeons had deemed inoperable, I took a red pen and wrote across the check in large letters, "Not for sale." The next morning dawned clear and bright. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the Grand Cathedral downtown, followed by a luncheon at the country club. I dressed carefully in a pale blue suit I'd had for years. Simple, elegant, and entirely appropriate for a mother of the bride. The check was in my purse, along with my phone containing the recording of Bradley's proposition. When I arrived at the cathedral, most of the wedding party was already there. Claire rushed over to embrace me. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here. We're just about to start." She lowered her voice. "Bradley seemed worried you might not come. Is everything okay between you two?" I cupped her cheek gently. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart. Trust me." The rehearsal proceeded smoothly. The wedding coordinator directed us through our paces, where to stand, when to walk, how to pace ourselves down the long aisle. As the mother of the bride, I would be escorted to my seat by one of Bradley's groomsmen just before the ceremony began. Claire would be walked down the aisle by Robert, Bradley's father, a modern choice that had surprised me, given that my late husband's brother had offered to do it. "Dad would want it this way," Claire had explained when she told me of the arrangement. "He'd want me to look forward, not back." I wasn't so sure about that. My husband had been an excellent judge of character, and I doubted he would have approved of Bradley, but I'd kept that thought to myself. After the rehearsal, Bradley approached me while Claire was busy with the wedding coordinator. "Well," he asked without preamble, "have you made your decision?" I reached into my purse and handed him the check, now marked with my red lettering. His face flushed with anger as he read it. "What is this supposed to mean?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "It means no," I said calmly. "I will not be bought. I will not miss my daughter's wedding. And I will not lie to her about why." His expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "No, Bradley. You made the mistake. You thought I was someone you could bully and dismiss. You thought your money could solve the problem of me." I stepped closer to him. "But here's what you don't understand. I spent 35 years cutting into people's brains. I made life-or-death decisions every single day. Men like you, men who think their wealth and privilege give them power over others, don't frighten me." He glanced around nervously, making sure no one was within earshot. Keep your voice down. Why? Are you afraid someone might hear the truth about you? Look, he said, his tone softening into something approaching reasonableness. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. I'm not trying to bully you. I'm just trying to make sure the wedding goes smoothly. For Claire's sake. No, you're trying to make sure the wedding presents the image you want. For your sake. I held his gaze steadily. I will be at my daughter's wedding tomorrow, Bradley. I will wear what I choose to wear, and I will sit in the front row, where the mother of the bride belongs. His facade of reasonableness slipped. This isn't over. Oh, I think it is. I turned to walk away, then paused. By the way, I recorded our conversation at the coffee shop. Every word of it. The color drained from his face. You what? You heard me. And if you try anything at all, to prevent me from attending tomorrow or to hurt Claire in any way, I'll make sure she hears that recording, along with everyone else at the wedding. He stared at me, calculation and fear warring in his eyes. Finally, he forced a smile. That won't be necessary, Dr. Winters. I think we understand each other perfectly now. As he walked away, I noticed his shoulders were tense, his stride stiff. Good. Let him worry. Let him wonder what I might do. The rehearsal luncheon was a tense affair, at least for Bradley and me. Claire, caught up in the excitement of her impending wedding, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents. She flitted from table to table, her happiness infectious, while Bradley stayed close to his business associates, casting occasional wary glances in my direction. Dr. Walter Jenkins joined me at my table, his familiar presence comforting. Walter and I had worked together for decades, and he'd been a rock during the difficult years after my husband's death. So, he said quietly, did you return the check? I did. And how did our young friend take it? About as well as you'd expect. I sipped my water. He's worried about the recording. Walter's eyes twinkled. As well he should be. Though I have to say, Margaret, I'm a bit surprised. I expected you to cash the check and still show up at the wedding. That would have been more your style. I laughed softly. I considered it. But some insults can't be answered that way. His expression grew serious. What will you do now? Will you tell Claire? I watched my daughter across the room, her face alight with joy, as she showed her engagement ring to an elderly relative. I don't know, I admitted. I don't want to hurt her. But I also don't want her to marry a man who would do something like this. She deserves to know the truth, Walter said gently. Yes, but when? And how? I sighed. If I tell her now, I ruin the wedding. If I wait until after, I've let her marry him knowing what I know. Walter covered my hand with his. You'll figure it out, Margaret. You always do. He checked his watch. I should get back to the hospital. I have rounds in an hour. He stood and gave my shoulder a squeeze. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. After he left, I sat alone at the table, watching the celebration unfold around me. Bradley caught my eye across the room and raised his glass in a mock toast, his smile not reaching his eyes. The message was clear. He might have lost this battle, but the war wasn't over. I raised my water glass in response, my own smile equally cold. He had no idea what was coming. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the golden light of sunset streaming through the windows. Claire called to check in, her voice bubbling with excitement about the next day. Everything's perfect, Mom, she said. The flowers, the cake, the music. It's all exactly how I imagined it. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I wanted her day to be special. Bradley seemed a bit tense at the luncheon, she said, a note of concern entering her voice. Did something happen between you two? I hesitated. This was my opening, my chance to tell her everything, but the words stuck in my throat. Nothing important, I said finally. Just a small disagreement about the seating arrangement. Oh, Mom. She sounded relieved. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it. He's just been so stressed with work, and his parents being in town, and all the wedding details. I'm sure you're right, I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. After we hung up, I paced my small living room, the decision weighing heavily on me. Tell her now and shatter her happiness? Or wait and risk her making the biggest mistake of her life? In the end, I decided to sleep on it. Perhaps in the morning, the path forward would be clearer. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew what I had to do. Bradley Thornton had shown me exactly who he was, not just through his proposition, but through every interaction we'd had. The way he spoke to service staff, the way he dismissed people he deemed unimportant, the way he tried to control and isolate Claire. My daughter deserved better. And tomorrow, one way or another, she would know the truth. The morning of Claire's wedding dawned with a crisp autumn brightness that seemed to mock the turmoil inside me. I rose early, having slept little, and began to prepare with the same methodical care I'd once given to preparing for surgery. Every movement was deliberate, every choice considered. I selected a dress I'd purchased years ago for a medical conference, a floor-length gown in deep emerald green that complemented my silver hair and brought out the color of my eyes. It was elegant without being flashy, dignified without being dowdy, precisely the image Bradley had deemed unsuitable for his wedding. As I fastened my pearl necklace, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Age had certainly left its marks on me, the creases around my eyes, the softening of my jawline, the silver that had completely overtaken my once brown hair. But there was strength in that face, too, and wisdom, and a determination that had seen me through the most challenging surgeries and the darkest days after my husband's death. This face had earned every line, every mark. It told the story of a life fully lived, of challenges met and overcome. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with photographs of the wedding party beginning at noon. As the mother of the bride, I wasn't required to be there for the early pictures, but I planned to arrive at the church by 1:30 to help Claire with any last-minute preparations. This would also give me time to decide, finally, how and when to confront Bradley. I'd spent the night considering my options. I could pull Claire aside before the ceremony and play her the recording, but that would devastate her at what should be one of the happiest moments of her life. I could wait until after the wedding, but by then it would be too late. She would already be legally bound to a man who had tried to bribe her mother into disappearing. Or I could confront Bradley one last time, giving him the chance to come clean to Claire himself before I was forced to do it for him. None of these choices was ideal. All would cause pain. But, as I'd learned through years of difficult surgeries, sometimes pain was necessary for healing. At 12:45, I received a text from Claire. Running behind on photos. Everything okay, but we're on church steps now if you want to come early and watch. I responded that I was on my way, gathered my things, and headed out. The cathedral was only a 20-minute drive from my apartment, its Gothic spires visible from blocks away as I approached. Even from a distance, I could see the flurry of activity on the steps, the photographer directing poses, attendants arranging Claire's train, Bradley standing stiffly in his tuxedo. I parked and made my way toward the church, my pace measured, my resolve strengthening with each step. As I drew closer, I could see Claire in her wedding gown, a vision in white satin and lace, her dark hair swept up in an elegant arrangement, her face radiant with happiness. The sight made my heart ache. She deserved this joy, this perfect day, and I was about to risk ruining it all. Before I could reach the steps, Bradley spotted me. He excused himself from the group and intercepted me on the pathway, his smile fixed, his eyes cold. "Dr. Winters," he said through clenched teeth. "You're early." Claire texted me, I replied calmly. She said they were running behind on photos. Bradley glanced over his shoulder at the wedding party, then back to me. "We need to talk. Now." He steered me away from the main entrance, around the side of the church, to a small garden area where we wouldn't be overheard. Once we were alone, his facade dropped entirely. "I thought we had an understanding," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We do," I agreed. I understand perfectly what kind of man you are. The question is, does Claire? His jaw tightened. I love Claire. Everything I've done has been for her benefit, including trying to bribe her mother to miss her wedding. I raised an eyebrow. Please, explain how that benefits Claire. You don't fit into our life, he said bluntly. You never have, and you never will. I'm trying to build something with Claire. A future, a family, connections that will secure our place in society. And you? He gestured dismissively at me. You're a liability. The cruelty of his words stung, but I didn't let it show. In what way am I a liability, Bradley? Because I live in a modest apartment? Because I wear the same pearl necklace my husband gave me, instead of whatever designer jewelry you deem acceptable? Or is it simply because I'm older, and that offends your aesthetic sensibilities? He stepped closer, towering over me, using his height as intimidation. You know exactly what I mean. Look at yourself. You insist on dressing like you're still living in the 1980s. You refuse Claire's offers to update your appearance. You won't even let her pay for you to get proper styling for the wedding. It's like you're deliberately trying to embarrass her. Claire has never been embarrassed by me, I said, my voice steady. Only you are. That's not true, he insisted. She's just too kind to say it to your face. Why do you think she agreed to have me take her down the aisle instead of asking you? Why do you think she forgot to invite you to her birthday dinner? She knows, Dr. Winters. She knows you don't fit into the life we're building. A seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. Could he be right? Had Claire been humoring me all this time, secretly wishing I would fade into the background? No, I knew my daughter. She was kind, yes, but she was also honest. If she had wanted me less involved in the wedding, she would have told me directly. Nice try, Bradley, I said, but I know my daughter better than you ever will. And soon, she'll know you better too. Fear flickered in his eyes. What does that mean? It means I'm done playing games. Either you tell Claire the truth about your proposition, or I will. His expression hardened. You're bluffing. You wouldn't ruin her wedding day, wouldn't I? I reached into my purse and took out my phone. Let's find out, shall we? I turned and started walking back toward the church steps. Bradley grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. Don't do this, he hissed. I'm warning you. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. Never touch me like that again, I said, my voice glacial. Now, we have two options. Either we find a private place where you can tell Claire what you did, or I play the recording for everyone to hear. Your choice. For a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. His face contorted with rage, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the fury was masked behind a cold smile. Fine, he said. We'll do this your way. But don't say I didn't warn you about the consequences. We walked back to the church steps together, maintaining a facade of civility. Claire spotted us and waved excitedly. Mom, you're here. What do you think? She twirled, her dress catching the sunlight. Is it too much? Bradley's mother thought I should have gone with something more traditional. But I love it. You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart, I said, meaning every word. Perfect? In every way. Bradley placed his hand possessively on Claire's waist. Darling, your mother and I need to speak with you about something. Privately. Claire's smile faltered. Now? We're in the middle of photos, and the ceremony starts in less than an hour. It's important, he insisted. It won't take long. She looked between us, confusion evident on her face. What's going on? Inside, Bradley said, already guiding her up the steps. We'll use one of the side rooms. I followed them into the church, my heart heavy. This wasn't how I'd wanted it to happen, but Bradley had left me no choice. The grand interior of the cathedral was alive with activity. Florists making last-minute adjustments to arrangements, the wedding coordinator checking details with the minister, guests beginning to arrive for the ceremony. Bradley led us to a small anteroom off the main vestibule, and closed the door behind us. Claire stood in the center of the room, her wedding dress gleaming in the muted light from the stained glass windows. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Is something wrong?" Bradley and I exchanged a look. After a moment of tense silence, he spoke. "Your mother has something she wants to tell you," he said, his tone suggesting I was about to reveal something shameful, something she's been hiding from you. Claire turned to me, her eyes wide. "Mom? What is it?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, Bradley has something to tell you. Don't you, Bradley?" His eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" I took out my phone. "Then perhaps you'd like me to refresh your memory." Claire looked between us, her confusion deepening. "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" I held Bradley's gaze. "Tell her. Tell her what you offered me. Tell her what you said about her mother." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to Claire, his expression softening into one of concerned sympathy. "Your mother has been behaving erratically. I think the stress of the wedding might be too much for her. She's making accusations, imagining conversations that never happened." "What?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "What kind of accusations?" Claire asked, her voice small. Before I could answer, Bradley took her hands in his. "Sweetheart, I didn't want to worry you with this, especially today of all days. But your mother, she seems to think I tried to bribe her not to come to the wedding. Can you imagine? Why would I ever do something so terrible?" Claire turned to me, her eyes reflecting hurt and confusion. "Mom, is that what you think happened?" "It's not what I think happened," I said firmly. "It's what did happen. Yesterday, Bradley offered me $50,000 to stay away from the wedding. He said I didn't fit the aesthetic he was going for, that I would embarrass you in front of his important business contacts." Claire's face paled. "Bradley? Is this true?" "Of course not," he scoffed. "It's absurd. Why would I do that? I know how much your mother means to you." I pulled up the recording on my phone. "Listen to this, Claire, then decide for yourself who's telling the truth." Bradley lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from my hand. "This is ridiculous. You can't just— Don't touch her!" Claire stepped between us, her expression fierce. "Bradley, what are you doing?" He backed away, straightening his tuxedo jacket. "I'm sorry, This whole situation is so bizarre. Your mother comes in here making wild accusations, threatening to ruin our wedding day with some supposed recording. Then let her play it," Claire said quietly. "If it's fake, we'll know immediately, right?" Bradley's confidence faltered. "Claire, we don't have time for this. The ceremony starts in 45 minutes. Guests are arriving. The photographer is waiting." "We have time for this," she insisted. She turned to me. "Play the recording, Mom." I pressed play, and Bradley's voice filled the small room. $50,000 in exchange for your absence at the wedding." Claire's hand flew to her mouth as the recording continued, capturing every cruel word, every dismissive comment about my appearance, every calculation about how her disappointment could be managed. When it ended, the room was silent, except for the muffled sounds of the gathering wedding guests beyond the door. Claire stood motionless, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on Bradley. "Claire," he began, his tone placating, "you have to understand." "Understand what?" she interrupted, her voice trembling. "That you tried to pay my mother to miss our wedding? That you insulted her, belittled her, treated her like she was something to be ashamed of?" "I was trying to protect you," he insisted, "to make sure everything was perfect for you." "Perfect?" Claire repeated incredulously. "You think a wedding without my mother would be perfect for me?" "That's not what I meant." Bradley ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his composure slipping. "Look, your mother and I have had our differences. She's never approved of me, never given me a fair chance. This recording, it's taken out of context. I was frustrated, saying things I didn't mean." Claire shook her head slowly. "I heard the context, Bradley. I heard every word. You offered my mother money to stay away from our wedding because you thought she wasn't good enough to be seen with your fancy business associates. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. Then what was it like? She demanded. Explain it to me. Make me understand how this could possibly be anything other than cruel and heartless. He reached for her hands, but she pulled away. Claire, please, I love you. Everything I do is for us, for our future. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions, decisions that might seem harsh, but are ultimately for the best. The best for whom? She asked quietly. For me? Or for you and your precious image? Bradley's expression hardened. You're overreacting. It was a misunderstanding, that's all. Your mother misinterpreted my intentions. Your exact words were that I don't project the image you're going for. I reminded him that I would be an embarrassment in the wedding photos. That's hardly ambiguous, Bradley. Claire turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he felt this way. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I assured her, taking her hands in mine. You couldn't have known. Bradley watched this exchange, his jaw clenched. So that's it? You're going to believe her over me? Your mother, who's been jealous of our relationship from day one? Who's never approved of me, never thought I was good enough for you? Claire looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. My mother has never said a negative word about you, Bradley. Not once. Even when you excluded her from wedding decisions, even when you forgot to invite her to my birthday dinner, even when you seated her at the furthest table at the rehearsal dinner, she has been nothing but gracious and supportive. Because she's manipulative, he insisted. She plays the martyr to make me look bad. No, Claire said softly. I see now that you do that all by yourself. She took a deep breath. I think you should go. What? Bradley stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. There are 200 people out there waiting for our wedding to begin. I'm very serious. Claire's voice was quiet but firm. I can't marry someone who would treat my mother this way, who would lie to my face about it, who would try to come between us. Claire, be reasonable, he pleaded, his tone shifting to one of condescension. You're upset. I understand that. But we can work through this. After the wedding, we'll sit down, all three of us, and clear the air. There's not going to be a wedding, she said simply. Not today, not ever. The color drained from Bradley's face. You don't mean that. You're just emotional right now. You're not thinking clearly. Actually, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in a long time. Claire slipped the engagement ring from her finger and held it out to him. I think this belongs to you. Bradley made no move to take it. Claire, don't do this. Think about what you're throwing away. The life we planned, the future we talked about. All because of a misunderstanding with your mother? This isn't about my mother, not really, Claire replied. It's about you, about who you really are. She placed the ring on a small table beside her. Please go, Bradley. I'll explain to the guests. For a moment, he seemed about to argue further. Then his expression hardened into something cold and distant. Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made. He straightened his jacket with a sharp tug. You'll regret this, Claire. Both of you will. With that, he strode from the room, slamming the door behind him. Claire stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then her shoulders began to shake, and I pulled her into my arms as the tears came. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, holding her close. I'm so sorry it had to happen this way. How could I have been so blind? She sobbed against my shoulder. How could I not have seen who he really was? Love can be blinding, I said gently, and Bradley was very good at showing you only what he wanted you to see. She pulled back slightly, wiping at her tears. All those times he excluded you, made excuses for why you couldn't be involved. I should have recognized it for what it was. Don't blame yourself, I said firmly. Bradley is manipulative and controlling. That's not your fault. Claire took a shuddering breath. What am I going to tell everyone? There are 200 people out there expecting a wedding. The truth, I said simply, or as much of it as you're comfortable sharing. People will understand. She nodded slowly, then glanced down at her wedding dress with a sad smile. All this for nothing. Not for nothing, I corrected her. You learned something valuable today, something that saved you from years of unhappiness. That's worth more than any wedding. Claire hugged me tightly. Thank you, Mom, for being brave enough to show me the truth, even when it hurt. As we held each other in that quiet room, with the sounds of an expectant wedding party filtering through the door, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. The day hadn't gone as planned, far from it, but my daughter was safe from a future with a man who would have slowly isolated her, controlled her, diminished her, and for that, I was profoundly grateful. The confrontation I'd dreaded had come, and while the aftermath would be difficult, I knew that Claire would emerge stronger. We both would. After all, we were Winter's women, and Winter's women didn't break easily. Outside the anteroom, the murmur of 200 expectant guests filled the cathedral. The organist had begun playing the prelude music, signaling that the ceremony should begin soon. Claire and I remained in our quiet sanctuary, the weight of what had just transpired settling around us like a heavy cloak. I need to tell everyone, Claire said finally, her voice steadier than I expected. She smoothed her hands over the wedding dress she'd chosen so carefully, the dress she would not be walking down the aisle in today. They deserve an explanation. Are you sure you want to do this yourself? I asked gently. I could speak to them, or we could ask the minister to make an announcement. She shook her head, determination replacing the shock in her eyes. No, this is my responsibility. These people came for me, for us. I need to be the one to tell them. I nodded, pride swelling in my chest despite the circumstances. This was the daughter I'd raised, courageous, principled, facing difficult situations head-on. What will you say? I asked. The truth, she replied simply. Maybe not all of it, but enough, that Bradley and I have realized we aren't right for each other, that I can't go through with the wedding. She took a deep breath. And then I'll apologize for the inconvenience and thank them for coming. That sounds perfect, I said, squeezing her hand. I'll be right beside you. Claire managed a small smile. I know you will. You always have been. We were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. The wedding coordinator, a harried-looking woman in her 40s, peeked in. Ms. Winters, everyone is seated, and the musicians are ready. We should start in 5 minutes. She glanced between us, noting Claire's tear-stained face and my protective stance beside her. Is everything all right? Claire straightened her shoulders. No, Patricia. Everything is not all right. The wedding is off. I need to speak to the guests. Patricia's professional composure slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening in shock. Then she quickly recovered. I see. Of course. Would you like me to make an announcement, or? I'll do it, Claire said. Can you ask the minister to join me at the altar? And please make sure the microphone is on. Of course. Patricia hesitated. And Mr. Thornton? Should I? Mr. Thornton has left, I said firmly. He won't be returning. With a nod of understanding, Patricia disappeared to make the arrangements. Claire turned to the small mirror on the wall and attempted to repair her makeup, wiping away the traces of tears. How do I look? She asked, turning to me. Beautiful, I said truthfully. And strong. She smiled wanly. I don't feel strong. That's often the case, I told her. Some of the strongest moments of my life were times when I felt anything but strong. Like the day I performed my first solo neurosurgery, or the day I had to tell a family their child wouldn't survive, or the day I buried your father. Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears. I wish Dad were here. He is, in a way, I said softly, in you, in the values he helped instill in you, in the strength you're showing right now. She nodded, composing herself once more. Okay, I'm ready. We walked together from the anteroom into the main body of the cathedral. The vaulted ceiling soared above us, the stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the assembled guests. As we moved down the aisle, not in the ceremonial procession that had been planned, but with purpose nonetheless, a hush fell over the crowd. Confusion was evident on many faces. I saw Bradley's parents in the front row, looking bewildered and increasingly concerned. At the altar, the minister waited, his expression compassionate. He had been briefed, at least partially, by Patricia. As Claire approached the microphone, he stepped aside respectfully. Claire stood for a moment, surveying the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear and steady when she spoke. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. "I know many of you have traveled far to be here, and I am grateful for your presence and your support. However, I have an announcement to make." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "The wedding will not be taking place today." A collective gasp rippled through the cathedral, followed by a buzz of whispered confusion. "Bradley and I have—" She faltered momentarily, then continued, "We have come to understand that we are not right for each other. This decision was not made lightly, and the timing is unfortunate, to say the least. But I believe it is better to face this difficult truth now than to make a mistake that would affect both our futures." Victoria Thornton rose from her seat, her face a mask of shock and anger. "Where is Bradley? What have you done to my son?" Claire looked at her steadily. "Bradley has left, Mrs. Thornton. It was his choice." "This is outrageous!" Robert Thornton stood beside his wife. "After all the money we've spent on this wedding, after all the arrangements, you decide now, with 200 guests seated, that you're not right for each other?" I stepped forward, placing myself slightly in front of Claire. "Mr. Thornton, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." He pointed a finger at me accusingly. This is your doing, isn't it? You've never approved of Bradley. You've poisoned Claire against him. Dad, that's enough." Bradley's voice came from the back of the cathedral. He stood in the entrance, his posture rigid, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or both. He strode down the aisle, every eye following him. "Claire has made her decision. Let's go." "But son," Victoria protested, "we can't just leave. What about our guests? What about the reception? The gifts?" "It's over, Mom," Bradley said flatly. "All of it." He turned to address the assembled crowd. "The wedding has been canceled. I apologize for the inconvenience. Please direct any questions to the Winters family, as they are the ones who decided to call things off at the last minute." The unfairness of his statement made me step forward again. "That's not entirely accurate, Bradley. Isn't it?" His eyes were cold as they met mine. "Claire was perfectly happy to marry me until you showed her that recording. A recording that could easily have been manipulated, by the way." Several guests gasped at this revelation. Claire moved to stand beside me, her hand finding mine. "The wedding is cancelled because I discovered something about Bradley that I cannot accept," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the cathedral. "I won't go into details out of respect for everyone involved, but please know that this decision, however difficult and badly timed, is the right one." "Respect?" Bradley laughed harshly. "Is that what you call it? Humiliating me in front of everyone we know?" Claire looked at him sadly. "That was never my intention. I'm sorry if you feel humiliated, but I couldn't go through with a marriage based on what I now know to be true." Bradley's jaw clenched. He looked as though he might say more, something cutting and cruel, but instead he turned abruptly. "Let's go," he repeated to his parents. "Now." After a moment of hesitation, Robert and Victoria followed their son down the aisle and out of the cathedral, their departure marked by the heavy sound of the massive doors closing behind them. In the silence that followed, Claire addressed the guests once more. "Again, I apologize for the circumstances. I understand this is disappointing and confusing. The reception hall has been paid for, and the food prepared. I see no reason why we shouldn't still use it, though obviously the nature of the gathering has changed. Please, join us there if you wish. Consider it a celebration of truth, if nothing else." A soft murmur of conversation rose as people began to process what had happened. Some looked uncomfortable, others concerned, a few even relieved. Claire's college roommate, seated in the second row, stood and approached the altar, wrapping Claire in a tight hug. This seemed to break the tension, and soon others were coming forward. Family members, close friends, offering support and comfort. In the midst of this, Dr. Walter Jenkins made his way to my side. "Well," he said quietly, "that was quite a scene." "Yes," I agreed. "Not how I expected this day to unfold." "Claire is handling it with remarkable grace," he observed. "She gets that from you." I smiled slightly. "Thank you, Walter, but I think she's always had that strength inside her. She just needed to find it." He nodded, then asked carefully, "The recording Bradley mentioned, was that?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I played it for Claire. She needed to know who she was really marrying." "Good," Walter said firmly. "She deserved the truth." He paused. "Will you still go to the reception?" I glanced at Claire, now surrounded by a small group of supportive friends. "If she wants to, yes. I won't leave her to face this alone." "Nor should you," he agreed. Then, with a slight smile, "Would you mind some additional company? I find I suddenly have an unexpected opening in my schedule this afternoon." For the first time that day, I felt a genuine smile tug at my lips. "I'd like that very much, Walter." The cathedral gradually emptied as guests made their way to the reception hall, or, in some cases, directly home. Claire, having changed out of her wedding dress into a simple blue dress she'd brought for the rehearsal dinner, moved among them, thanking them for coming, apologizing for the circumstances, accepting their well wishes with quiet dignity. "Are you sure you want to go through with the reception?" I asked her when we had a moment alone. "No one would blame you if you wanted to just go home." "I'm sure," she said. 200 people came to celebrate with me today. The fact that I'm not getting married doesn't mean we can't still celebrate something worthwhile. Like dodging a bullet." The flash of humor in her eyes heartened me. My daughter would be okay. The reception hall had been transformed into a wonderland of flowers and twinkling lights. The wedding cake stood on its table, a towering confection of white frosting and delicate sugar flowers. The head table, set for the bride and groom and their attendants, looked forlorn in its emptiness. "Should we rearrange some of this?" I asked Claire as we surveyed the scene. "Definitely," she decided. "Let's make it less wedding-y, more like a regular party." With the help of the venue staff and several friends who had arrived early, we transformed the space. The wedding cake was moved to a side table. Claire insisted it would still be eaten and enjoyed. The head table was dismantled, the formal place settings redistributed to create more casual seating arrangements. The elaborate Mr. and Mrs. Thornton backdrop for the photo booth was quietly removed. Guests began to arrive, many looking uncertain about the propriety of attending a wedding reception without a wedding. But Claire greeted each one warmly, and soon the atmosphere relaxed. The band, after a brief consultation with Claire, adjusted their playlist to exclude the more romantic, wedding-specific songs. The bar opened, food was served, and gradually, what might have been a disaster began to feel almost like a normal celebration. Different than planned, but not necessarily worse. I found myself at a table with Walter and several of my colleagues from the hospital who had been invited to the wedding. They were tactful enough not to ask for details about what had happened, instead keeping the conversation light and supportive. "Claire seems to be holding up remarkably well," observed Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the younger neurosurgeons I'd mentored before my retirement from surgery. "She's always been resilient, but this takes real strength." "She gets that from Margaret," Walter said, his eyes warm as they met mine. "Winter's women are made of stern stuff." I smiled at the compliment, but deflected it. Claire has always had her own kind of strength, different from mine in many ways, but no less powerful. She leads with her heart, which can make her vulnerable to people like Bradley, but it also gives her a compassion and insight that served her well in her work. "Speaking of work," Sarah said, Do you think she'll go back to the firm now? I know she was planning to cut back her hours after the wedding, maybe even leave entirely. The architectural firm where Claire worked had been understanding about her wedding plans, but I knew she'd been considering Bradley's suggestion that she focus on more suitable activities after they were married. Charity work, perhaps, or planning their social calendar. The thought had troubled me, but I'd kept my concerns to myself, determined not to interfere. I don't know, I admitted. That will be her decision to make. Across the room, Claire was dancing with her cousin's young son, twirling him around the dance floor to the delight of onlookers. Her face was animated, her laughter genuine. It struck me then that I hadn't seen her so relaxed, so authentically herself, in months, perhaps even longer. The afternoon wore on into evening. Some guests departed early, offering Claire awkward but sincere good wishes. Others stayed, the atmosphere growing increasingly festive as the initial shock wore off. The cake was cut, not with the ceremonial bride and groom knife, but with a regular serving knife, Claire joking that it was much less symbolic, but just as sharp. As the evening began to wind down, Claire found me sitting with Walter at a quiet table near the edge of the dance floor. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sinking into a chair with a sigh of relief. "My feet are killing me. These may not be wedding shoes, but they're still not made for hours of standing and dancing." "You've been the perfect hostess," I told her. "Far beyond what anyone could have expected under the circumstances." "It actually hasn't been that bad," she said, surprising me. "Once I got past the initial, horror of it all, it became almost liberating. No more pretending. No more feeling like I have to be perfect for Bradley's business associates or his parents' friends." She looked around the room thoughtfully. "You know what's strange? The people I've enjoyed talking to most tonight are the ones Bradley always tried to keep me away from. Your colleagues from the hospital, my old friends from college, people he thought weren't useful enough to cultivate relationships with." "Not so strange," Walter commented. "Those are people who know and care about the real Claire, not the version of you Bradley was trying to create." She nodded, looking at Walter with new appreciation. "That's exactly it. I felt like I was slowly being molded into Bradley Thornton's wife, this perfect, polished accessory to his ambition, and I was letting it happen." She turned to me, her expression troubled. "Why didn't you say something, Mom? You must have seen it happening." I considered my answer carefully. "I saw glimpses of it, yes, but it wasn't my place to tell you who to love or how to live your life. And Bradley was careful. He didn't reveal his true nature to me until he thought he had you securely under his influence. Still," she insisted, "you could have warned me. Would you have listened?" I asked gently. "Or would it have seemed like I was trying to come between you?" Claire was silent for a moment, then sighed. "You're right. I probably wouldn't have believed you. I was so infatuated with him, with the life he represented." She shook her head ruefully. "The successful businessman, the beautiful home, the social connections. It all seemed so perfect." "Perfection often comes at a cost," Walter observed, "and rarely is it what it appears to be on the surface." Claire smiled at him. "When did you get so wise, Dr. Jenkins?" "Oh, I've always been wise," he replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Your mother can attest to that. I've been dispensing unwanted advice to her for decades." I laughed. "And I've been ignoring it for just as long." Claire's expression grew serious again. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't recorded that conversation, Mom. If I had gone through with the wedding. How long would it have been before Bradley tried to cut you out of my life completely?" "We'll never know," I said, reaching for her hand. "And I'm grateful for that." "So am I," she said firmly, "though I'm not looking forward to dealing with the fallout. Returning gifts, canceling the honeymoon, explaining to everyone who wasn't here today what happened. One day at a time," I advised. "Tonight, just be proud of yourself for having the courage to make the right choice, however difficult it was." Claire nodded, then surprised me by leaning over to kiss my cheek. Thank you, Mom, for everything, for being exactly who you are, even when Bradley tried to make me see that as something to be ashamed of. Her words touched me deeply. You never need to thank me for that, sweetheart. Being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life. Walter cleared his throat, clearly moved by our exchange, but trying to lighten the moment. Well, now that we've established that Margaret is an exemplary mother, and Claire is an exceptionally brave young woman, might I suggest we see if there's any of that rather excellent cake left? It seems a shame to let good buttercream go to waste on a night of emotional revelations. Claire laughed, the sound genuine and unrestrained. Dr. Jenkins, that might be the best suggestion I've heard all day. As we made our way toward the cake table, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the large mirrors that adorned the reception hall walls. The woman looking back at me was dressed simply but elegantly in emerald green, her silver hair neatly styled, her pearl necklace gleaming softly in the light. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman of a certain age who had lived a full and meaningful life, who had raised a daughter she could be proud of, who had never compromised her values for appearance's sake. Bradley Thornton had offered me $50,000 to disappear because he thought I didn't fit the aesthetic he was cultivating. How little he understood about true value, about what really mattered in life. The reflection in the mirror smiled back at me, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the wisdom that comes with age, with experience, with living authentically in a world that often values appearance over substance. Tonight had not gone according to plan, far from it. But as I watched Claire laughing with Walter over slices of what should have been her wedding cake, I couldn't help but think that perhaps it had gone exactly as it needed to. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in my living room, my real living room, not the temporary apartment where Bradley had first shown his disdain. The renovations on my house had finally been completed, transforming the home where I'd raised Claire into a space that balanced cherished memories with fresh beginnings. The afternoon sunlight streamed through new windows, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors that had been refinished to their original honey glow. "The contractors did a beautiful job," Claire commented, curled up on the sofa across from me. "It feels like home again, but better somehow." "That was the goal," I said, passing her a cup of tea, honoring the past while embracing the future. Claire smiled, understanding the metaphor. The past 3 months had been a journey of rebuilding for her as well, dismantling the life she'd almost committed to with Bradley and constructing something new from the foundation of who she truly was. The days following the cancelled wedding had been challenging, of course. There had been awkward phone calls to distant relatives explaining what had happened, gifts to return, deposits that couldn't be refunded. Bradley's parents had threatened legal action over the expenses they'd incurred, though nothing had come of it, likely because Bradley himself had wanted the whole incident buried as quickly as possible. What none of us had anticipated was how quickly the story would spread through Bradley's professional circles. The morning after the wedding, one of Bradley's business associates, a woman who had witnessed his cold dismissal of me at Claire's birthday dinner, had approached Claire privately. "I hope you don't mind my saying this," she'd told Claire, "but I think you dodged a bullet. I've seen how Bradley treats people he considers beneath him. It's not pretty." That conversation had been the first of many. As word spread about the cancelled wedding, others came forward with their own Bradley Thornton stories. Employees he'd belittled, colleagues he'd undermined, domestic staff he'd treated as invisible. The picture that emerged was of a man whose public charm masked a profound contempt for those he deemed unworthy of his respect. "I'm still embarrassed that I didn't see it," Claire said now, as if reading my thoughts. All the signs were there. "Love can be very blinding," I reminded her, "and Bradley was skilled at showing you only what he wanted you to see." "Still," she insisted, "I should have noticed how he treated the waitstaff at restaurants, or how he spoke about your colleagues at the hospital, or how he always had to be the most important person in the room." I reached across and patted her hand. What matters is that you saw the truth when it counted most. Claire nodded, taking a sip of her tea. Have you heard the latest about Bradley's company? I shook my head. Though I tried not to dwell on Bradley Thornton, I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in hearing about the consequences he'd faced in the aftermath of his exposed behavior. They lost the Westridge Pharmaceuticals contract, Claire said. Apparently, the CEO was at our non-wedding, heard what happened, and decided Bradley wasn't someone they wanted to do business with after all. Integrity matters in business as much as in personal relationships, I observed, something Bradley never understood. His company is struggling, Claire continued. I heard from Michael, you remember? His former college roommate who was at the wedding, that Bradley's had to lay off half his staff. There are rumors he might have to sell to a competitor. I didn't reply immediately, processing this information. I took no joy in the suffering of the innocent employees caught in the fallout of Bradley's actions, but there was a certain poetic justice in seeing his carefully constructed empire begin to crumble. Enough about Bradley, Claire said decisively. I have news. Good news, I hope, I asked, noting the bright anticipation in her eyes. The best, she confirmed. The firm has offered me a partnership. Claire, I exclaimed. That's wonderful. Congratulations. She beamed, her face alight with genuine pride. It wasn't even on my radar before. Everything. Bradley had been so insistent that I scale back my career, focus on being a corporate wife, that I'd almost convinced myself it was what I wanted too. And now? Now I realize how much I love my work, how good I am at it. The partners specifically mentioned the Riverside Cultural Center project, the one Bradley thought was a waste of time because it didn't involve high-profile clients. She shook her head, still amazed by the memory. It turns out that project won a regional award for innovative, community-centered design. The very thing Bradley dismissed as unimportant. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Not just for the partnership, but for reclaiming your passion, your purpose. Claire smiled softly. I had a good example in that department. She glanced at the mantel, where a framed photograph stood, me in surgical scrubs, much younger, standing beside a team of doctors after a particularly challenging operation. You never let anyone tell you that your work wasn't valuable, or that you should be anything other than exactly who you are. I had my moments of doubt, I admitted, especially in the early days, when there were so few women in neurosurgery. But I knew the work mattered, regardless of whether everyone recognized its value. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Claire set down her teacup and looked at me with sudden seriousness. There's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Something important. Of course, I said, setting aside my own cup. What is it? It's about Dr. Jenkins. I felt a flicker of alarm. Walter? Is he all right? He's fine, Claire assured me quickly. More than fine, actually, but, well, I've noticed how often he's been coming by, how you light up when he's around. The way you two seem to have your own private language sometimes, built on decades of shared experience. I felt a flush rising to my cheeks, as if I were a schoolgirl caught passing notes rather than a 68-year-old woman. Walter and I have been colleagues and friends for a very long time. Mom, Claire said gently, I think it's more than that. At least, it could be, if you let it. The observation hung between us. Walter Jenkins had indeed been a constant presence in the months since the wedding, stopping by with dinner when I was too tired to cook, offering his expertise on the house renovations, simply sitting with me in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. We'd always been close, but there was a new dimension to our relationship now, an unspoken possibility that neither of us had directly acknowledged. Walter is a dear friend, I said carefully. He's been a wonderful support through everything. And that's all? Claire pressed, her expression knowing. I sighed, unable to dissemble with my perceptive daughter. I don't know, Claire. At our age, these things are complicated. Why? She challenged. Because society says people in their 60s and 70s shouldn't find love again? Because you've been on your own for so long? Because you're afraid? All of the above, perhaps, I admitted. And more besides. Walter and I have a wonderful friendship. What if trying to make it something else ruins that? Claire leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. Mom, after everything that's happened, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life is too precious to waste on what-ifs. And you taught me to be brave enough to walk away from a mistake. Maybe now it's time to be brave enough to walk toward something that could bring you joy. I squeezed her hands, touched by her wisdom and her concern for my happiness. When did you get so insightful about relationships, especially given recent events? She laughed. Maybe because of recent events. Nothing clarifies what really matters like almost making a catastrophic mistake. Her expression grew serious again. Promise me you'll at least think about it? Dr. Jenkins looks at you the way Dad used to, like you're the most fascinating person in the room. I'll think about it, I promised. Though in truth, I'd been thinking about little else whenever Walter was near. Our conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Claire raised an eyebrow and glanced at her watch. Right on time. That'll be James. James? I questioned. I didn't realize you were expecting someone. Claire smiled mysteriously as she rose to answer the door. I invited him to join us for dinner. I hope that's all right. Before I could respond, she had disappeared into the hallway. I heard the front door open, followed by the low murmur of voices, Claire's familiar tones and a deeper masculine voice I didn't recognize. Curious, I stood as Claire returned to the living room, accompanied by a tall man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Mom, this is James Calloway, Claire said. James? My mother, Dr. Margaret Winters. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Winters, James said, extending his hand. Claire speaks of you often, and with great admiration. His handshake was firm, but not overpowering, his smile genuine. I placed him in his early 40s, perhaps 10 years older than Claire. There was a quiet confidence about him, different from Bradley's calculated charm. James is the executive director of the community foundation that sponsored the Riverside Cultural Center, Claire explained. We've been working together on the final phases of the project. Among other things, James added, with a gentle smile toward Claire that spoke volumes. Understanding dawned on me. I see. Well, it's lovely to meet you, James. Please, sit down. Can I offer you some tea? Or perhaps something stronger? We were just about to switch to wine, I think. I gave Claire a meaningful look, which she returned with an unrepentant grin. Wine would be wonderful, thank you, James said, settling onto the sofa beside Claire. Close, but not presumptively so. As I went to the kitchen to fetch the wine, I heard Claire giving James a brief tour of the living room through words, pointing out favorite pieces and explaining the recent renovations. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by genuine laughter. It was a stark contrast to the strained politeness that had characterized most interactions with Bradley. When I returned with the wine and glasses, James was examining the photograph on the mantel, the one of me in surgical scrubs. Claire mentioned you were a neurosurgeon, he said as I poured the wine. My father's life was saved by a neurosurgeon when I was 12. Brain aneurysm. The doctor said it was touch and go for a while, but Dad pulled through. He's 82 now and still going strong. That's wonderful, I said, passing him a glass. Neurosurgery has advanced tremendously over the years, but it's still as much an art as a science. That's what Claire said, that watching you work was like watching an artist. She told me she used to observe your surgeries sometimes when she was in medical school, before she decided to switch to architecture. I glanced at Claire, surprised. You never told me you found it that compelling. She shrugged slightly. I was afraid you'd be disappointed that I didn't follow in your footsteps, but watching you in the operating room, the focus, the precision, the absolute commitment to getting everything exactly right, that stayed with me. It's influenced my approach to architecture more than I realized until recently. I was never disappointed, I assured her. I only ever wanted you to find work that fulfilled you the way surgery fulfilled me. I have, she said simply, her eyes bright with certainty, especially now. The doorbell rang again, interrupting our moment. This time I was the one to raise an eyebrow at Claire. Another surprise guest? She smiled innocently. You did say we were having pot roast. It seemed a shame not to share it. I went to answer the door myself this time, already suspecting who I'd find on the other side. Sure enough, Walter Jenkins stood on my porch, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small bouquet of yellow roses in the other. Margaret, he said warmly, Claire mentioned you were cooking pot roast tonight, and I remembered how much I enjoyed it the last time. I hope you don't mind my joining you. Not at all, I said, accepting both the wine and the flowers with a smile, though I'm beginning to suspect a conspiracy. Walter glanced past me to where Claire and James could be seen chatting in the living room. An intervention, perhaps, he suggested with a twinkle in his eye, for two stubborn people who might need a little nudge in the right direction. I felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. Come in, Walter. Dinner's almost ready. The four of us gathered around my dining room table, the conversation flowing as naturally as the wine. James spoke about his work with the Community Foundation, his passion for public spaces that served everyone evident in every word. Walter shared stories from the hospital, the light-hearted ones, not the difficult cases, and Claire talked animatedly about her partnership and the new projects she was eager to begin. I found myself watching them all, these people who had become my unexpected circle of support and joy. Walter across from me, his familiar face lined with years of shared experiences, his eyes still lighting up when he made me laugh. Claire beside me, more truly herself than she had been in the months with Bradley, her confidence restored and flourishing. And James, a new presence, but a welcome one, treating Claire with a respect and admiration that Bradley had never shown. After dinner, Claire and James insisted on handling the dishes, while Walter and I took our wine to the back porch. The evening was mild, the sky clear enough to see a few stars despite the city lights. Claire seems happy, Walter observed, settling into one of the porch chairs. Genuinely happy. She is, I agreed. It's been remarkable to watch her find herself again these past few months. And James seems like a good man. Yes, I said thoughtfully, though it's early days yet. Walter chuckled. Your protective instincts are showing, Margaret. Can you blame me? After Bradley? Not at all. He took a sip of his wine, then asked carefully, And what about you? Are you happy? I considered the question, looking out at the garden where spring bulbs were just beginning to push through the soil, new life emerging after the dormancy of winter. I am, I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke, not in spite of everything that happened, but because of it in some ways. It forced a kind of reckoning, a reassessment of what really matters. And what does really matter? In your assessment. Walter's question was gentle but direct, his eyes intent on mine. Authenticity, I said after a moment, being true to yourself, even when others find that inconvenient. The courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And I hesitated, then finished softly. The people who see your true value, who never ask you to be less than you are. People like Claire, Walter suggested. Yes, and perhaps people like me? His voice was steady, but I could see the vulnerability in his eyes. I set my wine glass down and turned to face him fully. Walter, we've known each other for what? 35 years? 37, he corrected with a smile. Since you joined Memorial as a brilliant but terrifyingly intense young neurosurgeon who intimidated half the department. I laughed at the memory. You were never intimidated. Oh, I was, he admitted, but I was also fascinated and impressed and eventually completely smitten, though I never said anything because you were married to David, and he was a good man. The confession, so simply stated after all these years, took my breath away. You never said, It wasn't my place, Walter said quietly. You had a good marriage, a beautiful daughter, a fulfilling career. I was content to be your colleague, your friend, to operate alongside you, to learn from you, to share the triumphs and sorrows that come with our profession. And after David died, Walter's eyes were gentle. You were grieving. And then, just when I thought perhaps enough time had passed, Claire got engaged to Bradley, and you were focused on that, on protecting her, though she didn't know she needed protection yet. I reached across the space between our chairs and took his hand. It was a surgeon's hand, like mine, capable, steady, marked by years of saving lives. And now, Walter said, his fingers interlacing with mine, I find myself wondering if two old surgeons might have a new chapter to write. If it's not too late for us to explore what might have been, what still could be. From inside the house came the sound of Claire's laughter, bright and uninhibited. It was the laugh of her childhood, before self-consciousness set in, before Bradley's subtle criticisms taught her to modulate her joy. The sound filled me with a fierce gladness, a profound gratitude that she had escaped a life where such laughter would have been gradually silenced. It's not too late, I told Walter, squeezing his hand. For any of us. Later that evening, after Claire and James had left, James promising to bring Claire home safely from their planned walk around the neighborhood, Walter and I stood at my front door, neither quite ready to say goodbye. I've been thinking, Walter said, his hand still holding mine, about that trip you've always talked about taking, the one to see the northern lights. Iceland, I nodded. It's been on my list for years. Mine too. He looked slightly nervous, which was endearing in a man who had performed thousands of life-or-death surgeries. What would you think about us going together this fall, when the aurora is supposed to be particularly spectacular? The invitation hung between us, representing far more than just a trip. It was a beginning, a declaration of intent, a promise of shared experiences to come. I'd like that very much, I said, my heart light with possibility. Walter's smile was worth every moment of uncertainty, every fear I'd had to overcome. He leaned forward and, with the gentleness that had made him an excellent surgeon, kissed me softly. Good night, Margaret, he said when we parted. I'll call you tomorrow. Good night, Walter. After he left, I stood for a moment on the porch, looking up at the night sky. $50,000. That was the price Bradley Thornton had placed on my absence, on my invisibility. How little he had understood about true worth, about the value of authenticity, about the power of being exactly who you are without apology. In the 6 months since that day in the coffee shop, when Bradley had slid that check across the table with such casual cruelty, lives had been transformed in ways none of us could have predicted. Claire had found her strength and was building a career based on her own talents and values, not someone else's expectations. She was discovering what real respect and affection looked like in James, whose admiration for her work and mind was genuine. Bradley's carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the hollowness beneath, while his business empire began to follow suit, built as it was on the same superficial foundations. And I had found my own unexpected joy in standing firm for what I knew was right, in watching my daughter blossom once freed from Bradley's influence, and now in the promise of a new relationship with a man who had valued me exactly as I was for nearly 4 decades. As spring unfurled around us, bringing new growth and possibility, I thought about the check I'd returned to Bradley that day, marked "Not for Sale" in bold red letters. It had been more than a rejection of his bribe. It had been a declaration of principle, a statement of self-worth, an affirmation that some things, integrity, dignity, a mother's love, had no price tag. Bradley had offered me $50,000 to miss my daughter's wedding because he thought I didn't fit the aesthetic he was cultivating. What he could never understand was that true beauty, true value, true worth came not from fitting some artificial standard, but from living authentically, from standing in your truth, even when others find it inconvenient. In the end, his attempt to erase me had only made me more visible to Claire, who now saw clearly the man she had almost married, to Walter, who had found the courage to voice feelings held silent for years, and, most importantly, to myself. At 68, with silver hair and lines earned through a life of purpose, I had never felt more certain of my own worth, never more comfortable in my own skin, never more excited for what the future might hold. The $50,000 Bradley had offered was long gone, the check torn up and discarded. But what I had gained, what we had all gained, was beyond price. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.